What is up, everybody? I am your host, Shane Mallory, joined by my co-host,
Ricky DaCosta.
Tell the folks what time it is.
Run it back.
Time to run it back, people. Big announcement here. Episode number 30. Episode 30, baby. We're here and we're not going anywhere. Beautiful people, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's really easy. You see that bell button, you click it, all right? And then you like all of our beautiful comments and even get back with us so we can get a little back and forth going with you. If you like to engage and you want all that smoke, as my partner likes to refer to it as, we got all that smoke for you and then some. But please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe and give us those 5-star reviews.
Listen,
on all
I
our
think
major
people
platforms.
got a lot to say with all your Mike Tyson, Jake
Oh
Paul
my God,
comments.
yeah. That reel's getting played in my ear every other second in school. But listen, I think some people are going to be surprised today. First of all, shorter show today. We're only going to go 2 segments, all right? But still jam-packed within those segments. We are going to talk about basketball. No. Football. No. Baseball. Major League Baseball is getting its first debut on Run It Back here.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about this big Shohei Ohtani story.
See, look at that. You like the drama, right? Instead of talking about the Yankees, instead of talking about the drama, you want to talk about gambling, right? You want to talk about scandals.
And I'm not
You want to
even
talk
a
about
gambler.
robbery.
Yeah.
What kind of shenanigans is this?
So, listen, first of all, Shohei Ohtani, the fact that not enough people know who he is, I think that's a crime in and of itself. Baseball needs to figure that out. This guy is doing something that we haven't really seen since, like, the Babe Ruth years.
Yeah.
He's hitting at extremely high level, and he's also a top 3 or 4 pitcher inside of his own rotation, too, as well. I don't know if he's, like, Cy Young level, but I do think he is a very solid pitcher, like, above average amongst
Absolutely.
MLB standards, which if you look at baseball in terms of like its inception when it started, this is kind of how the game was designed to be played. The pitcher is supposed to be a hitter also too. Got away from that a lot too with the DH, but I digress. He has caught himself up in a major kind of gambling story. Now, all accounts and his testimony so far, and it's not even testimony, it's not like he was doing it in front of a grand jury, but he spoke in front of ESPN, I think it was either today or yesterday, through a new interpreter, which we'll get to later. But he's claiming his innocence. He's claiming theft, amongst other things, that he had no idea of anything that the former interpreter was doing. But I'll kind of try to give as
A little
quick
overview.
overview of kind of what's more or less going on. So it was reported a week ago that Shohei Ohtani's former interpreter, his name is Ippei Mizuhara, okay?
That was good.
Yeah.
That was good.
I'm
You
trying
practiced.
here.
You practiced.
I was
didn't you?
reading a lot about this today, yeah, so I wanted to make sure I didn't want to butcher anybody's name. But Ippei Mizuhara, okay, is caught up apparently in a gambling scandal with an illegal bookmaker in California. I'll get to his name later. I think it's Matthew Boyer is the guy's name. Someone coming out of California, okay? I don't want to go through too many things because obviously there's a tremendous federal investigation going on.
Yeah.
So I want to try and make sure I get the names right, not misimplicate anybody. But by my readings, Ippei Mizuhara had something like a $4.5 to almost $5 million gambling debt that was owed to this bookmaker in California, I believe, was where the business was. The money that was paid to Boyer was paid of one of Shohei Ohtani's bank accounts. I'm assuming it's his primary account. It's his former.
Not necessarily, He's got $700
Don't know.
million.
I don't know
Right,
the
that
fraud.
could be the
multiple accounts.
You emergency fund.
There could be all sorts of things going on. Now, I think the tricky part of this whole situation is Ippei Mizuhara originally said to ESPN last week, and then this is quoted both in CBS Sports and Yahoo Sports. He said that Shohei Ohtani was a friend. He was helping him pay off former gambling debts. A day later, Ippei then says, oh, no, Shohei Ohtani didn't know anything about this money. These were my own debts. He had no idea. And now Shohei Ohtani comes out and finally speaks, okay, and says that he didn't know anything about this. He's going fraud, there's like a D word or something. I forget the other. But fraud, obviously, there's a major fraud going on here in the investigation. The other part of this, too, now, is that Shohei Ohtani's representation, a man by the name of Nez Balello, okay? Now, baseball fans might actually know this guy's name. He's right now, I guess, still one of Shohei Ohtani's representatives, but he was involved in a scandal much earlier involving, you and I were talking about this pre-show, Ryan Braun. So Ryan Braun was brought up on charges for, I think he was He was up for a 50-game suspension by the MLB
Right,
for performance
PEDs.
PEDs.
Yep.
The whole biogenesis thing that came out and the reports. So he went on like a crusade, like through trials and whatnot. He actually was able to get one of the lead investigators or handlers kicked off. I'm not going to go into all details about that, but something racist / prejudicially related to the investigator towards Ryan Braun. And this guy, Nez Bolello, was also involved. Apparently, he was like he was involved in the sample handling, the urine sample handling for one Braun. So Braun got off on the charges. Fast forward a year later, it was found out he was implicated and proven to being one of the biogenesis people and users. And the whole thing was all for naught. Somebody lost their job for no reason. He didn't even end up getting suspended. I forget how that whole story turned out. Again, you're talking 12 years ago. Yeah. But I only bring up that name because he's now one of Shohei Ohtani's representatives, and he hasn't spoken anything or been seen since this story came out about Shohei. So I lead all this up just to sit here, and I'll give you my perspective. When I heard about the story change, I definitely got a little bit skeptical there because I'm just like, I think I don't watch a ton of baseball like I once did. Used to be my favorite sport. I'll get into why I don't really pay attention to it as much anyway. But Shohei Ohtani, I think, is awesome. For the reasons that I said. I mean, seems like a worker. He is a star I think that baseball really needs. I think they need to do a better job of marketing him. But a guy who can hit an extremely high level, gets a $700 million contract, which is record-breaking, can also pitch. I mean, the value of a player like that to your baseball team, that's awesome. But the other thing that this brings in is the whole gambling aspect of it. This isn't the first time baseball has had a highly prominent star involved in the gambling. They're keeping out arguably one of the greatest baseball players of all time from the Hall of Fame for something he did as a manager. But when I kind of link up these facts, show you the different things that's out there, give me your thoughts on this story as a whole and how it affects Major League Baseball.
Yeah, listen, I think it's just tough and it's a very sensitive topic, right?
Absolutely.
And for us just trying to, point out, the facts and try to, take away opinions, but trying to interpret what's happening.
Yep.
And so
far for the record, Shohei Ohtani, no criminal
anything
he
towards him at
vehemently
all. Denied that he didn't know anything,
You're innocent until proven guilty,
So, I mean, here's the situation, right? Sure. Obviously, Shohei is a foreigner, right?
Yes.
And so
that's a big part of it, too.
Initially, now, right, this is just my assumption, right? This is just my opinion in trying to dissect the situation. That, let's say his interpreter was doing this, right? And his interpreter was in charge of his account to some degree. And so he's illegally gambling, right? And so ultimately, they may have perceived it to be not that big of a deal, right? Because technically gambling is legalized in the United States.
As long as it was on other sports too. It couldn't have been on baseball itself.
So then that's a different layer, right?
Yeah,
There's just gambling in general is legalized in the United States, through avenues like FanDuel, drafting,
through the legal process.
Right, exactly, in specific states.
Yes.
However,
state laws vary, correct?
State laws do vary. I think it's only about like 12 to 18
that
states
have legalized
gambling.
Okay.
But there is an underground world, right, where you have bookies and so on and so forth.
Which we've had for much longer.
Right, for much longer. So now what I'm saying is in this particular situation, it is possible, right, that they thought it wasn't that big of a deal, right? Hey, my friend just paid off my debts. My friend that has $700 million is paying off my debts, right? Hey, Major League Baseball, no big deal. My friend, help me out. The Dodgers fired me for crossing a line between friend and professionalism, right? However, the federal government's involved now. Right? The federal government is involved because several millions of dollars, right, have been wired from one party to another. And that party that received the funds, right, allegedly
what it seems to be an illegal setup.
An illegal setup. So now all of a sudden there's a slew of other federal violations that may have occurred. And so where Shohei Ohtani's lawyers, representatives, and other parties that are invested in his success may have laid the law of the United States land to say, hey, you've passed the point that this is just a Major League Baseball issue that you could just get a slap on the wrist. The federal government is involved. When the federal government's involved, now all of a sudden,
whole different ballgame.
Exactly. Now you have to bring in
No
that
pun
particular that particular enterprise, you know, their dealings, right? How did Shohei or how did Shohei's interpreter find them, right? What's their client list? How long have this been going on?
Sure.
And it seems like, and I don't know if I'm having a misunderstanding of this. This 4.5 million was losses, right? This was surrounded by, you know, a series of transactions.
This is interpreter gamble losses.
So how long was it going on? Were there other wins? Were there other losses prior in smaller denomination, 500,000, $1 million, so on and so forth? Those things we don't know.
You're saying Shohei more or less is going to probably have to show other losses.
Well,
right?
so is it possible the federal government is involved because there's been a series of transactions that they flagged? You know, we don't know, right? We absolutely don't know.
Yes.
So I think, so to just the point of saying all that is to reference, why did the story potentially change in a day? It went from like, hey, one buddy helped another buddy to wait, now the federal government's involved. Did you know about this?
I got what you're saying.
You didn't, then he took it. If he took it without
so far, the
your
only
knowledge,
person we know that lied is Ippei Mazuhara.
Exactly, but that's the thing. If he took it without your knowledge, if he took it without your permission, right, then essentially that is theft.
Sure.
Even though he has access to your account without your permission, right, a whole other slew of charges come into play.
Sure.
So I think all of a sudden, you know, someone explaining all of this to Shohei may have made him realize how serious the situation is. Because again, is it possible that he confused gambling legally, right, and just gambling in the United States illegally, and why they're so different?
Sure.
And so that might be where we are today.
Yep.
Look, ultimately, he came out, he spoke to the media, he said
Seemed
he
like a
wasn't
strong
involved.
statement too. Strong
very
denial.
strong statement.
By all accounts, for the record, too, all those in the Dodgers organization and other major league players that know him say they highly doubt that this is something that Shohei Ohtani would do. He's about that work. He's about that action. He's about just being the best baseball player he can possibly be.
Yeah, you know, and listen, you know, I don't want to judge, right? But
I'm with you.
How well does he know American sports gambling, right?
Sure.
You know, maybe where he came from,
Yes.
or you know, other sort of global gambling, gambling, you know, syndications and stuff like that. You know, that maybe that would have made a little bit more sense if he was sort of gambling, you know, with someone from, you know, his country or something like that. But for all indications, you know, it looks like he's innocent in this situation, and hopefully Major League Baseball comes out clean in this, and Shohei comes out clean in this, because he is the star, and we don't want to see him get in trouble. You brought up Pete Rose, right, and the stuff that he went through, and he's, you know, you can argue he's more famous for being banned than, you know, being let in, and he had a phenomenal career. So ultimately, Major League Baseball doesn't need this black eye. Now, you know, you can argue any attention is good attention, even if it's bad attention, right? So now everybody is focused on Major League Baseball.
People are definitely talking about.
Opening day is in a couple of days, and so now baseball's on the top of everyone's mind and radar. So let's see what happens. But ultimately, I think most of us are rooting for a successful outcome.
Me too.
Because Shohei is a superstar. Granted, he didn't end up with the Yankees, but he's with the Dodgers, and you know, he should do some great things.
Yeah, listen, and I think I want to just somewhat tie a bow in this conversation with this, and somewhat my issue with baseball at a larger. I have plenty of issues with the game too. It just, I feel like it hasn't moved with the times in some regard. But you shut Pete Rose, arguably one of the greatest hitters in the history of the game, out of the Hall of Fame for something he did as a manager. You can say that he broke the rules, but he did that as a manager, not as a player. I don't think it should affect his playing career. That's just me personally. But then you fast forward all of a sudden to the 90s. What was one of the most exciting baseball seasons any of us ever watched? Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa home run race, right? You turned a blind eye to all of that during that time, and then retroactively after the fact kind of tried to go and punish all those guys. You knew what was going on. There were reports all over. There's still a famous interview, you can go find it on YouTube, of Mark McGwire doing an interview right in front of his locker, and right up in the top thing is like multiple supplements that were actually like found out to be banned later that were sitting up on the top of his locker. It's like, baseball, don't act like you didn't know. But then you go through all this like crusade of cleaning up the game. And again, for the record, I'm hoping Shohei Ohtani comes out clean in this too. And MLB is doing its own investigation. I have to sit there though and question, with a sport that's dropped in both viewership and popularity since I believe it is 2007, if I'm not mistaken. They've dropped every year in their viewerships. They're now third fiddle in the United States behind both the NFL and the NBA. And they have to watch out because college football is soon encroaching upon their territory too as well. I do have to wonder how thorough of an investigation they're going to do on Shohei, because they can't really afford to lose their biggest star. Because without Shohei, I just don't really see the larger reason for why people want to watch baseball. I don't say this to people. My dad, diehard baseball fan. It's my first ever. It's my favorite sport. And I don't want to spend the whole time on this conversation. But baseball does need to realize, like, its whole kind of arbitrary process. We are going to police. We aren't going to police. The unwritten rules. It's just kind of like, make up your minds. Because at the same time, we're sitting there looking at somebody like a Pete Rose story, for an example. But then in football, we call the greatest coach and the greatest quarterback of all time, who both got caught in large scandals, we call him the greatest of all time.
But, okay, listen, remember this, right?
Sure.
You know, even what's being alleged, nothing was gambled on baseball,
yes,
right? And if the gambling was occurring in other sports, there's been one or two incidents in the past,
sure,
and they've only been a fine,
yep,
right? So from the baseball side, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think where the issue is going to come into play is, you know, sending money to this booking agency.
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Especially if we didn't have a legal, if it wasn't.
Exactly, right? Like that's, you know, that's the federal government is involved now. So they're going to want they're going to sink their teeth into something. So let's see what it ends up being.
Yeah, I'm with you. And listen, I do really hope that Shohei Ohtani gets out of this clean. And yeah, maybe if baseball gets a little bit more prominent, maybe we'll try to pick a topic here and there to talk about it if we can.
I mean, listen, the Yankees.
Yeah, we can talk about the Yankees.
You know?
I mean, but let me wait till opening day, maybe a couple of games. I want to talk about the Yankees. But something we do got to talk about that got a lot of news and obviously got big time react over. It's X now, right? It's not Twitter technically. I know everybody still calls it Twitter, but a bunch of people reacting on X and other social media platforms is this. I think it's called the hip drop tackle, the hip grab tackle. I'm not sure. Nonetheless, it's been banned. The impetus for this was the injury to...
and just to lay the groundwork you're talking about, right? The NFL just had their coaches meeting.
Correct.
Right? An owners meeting.
An owners meeting.
Right?
And all
and
the
decided on
voted
a couple different rules, changes, and so on and so forth for the upcoming season. Go ahead.
That is 100% correct. Thank you for the prelude, actually. Very good there. So the hip drop tackle has been banned, okay? And I think the impetus for this was the injury to Mark Andrews earlier in the year, Baltimore. So if you watch the play, you see the linebacker, I think it's not Hendrickson, I forget his name, but the good linebacker on Cincinnati Bengals, I think he's number 55, comes from kind of like a weird angle across the field. Mark Andrews is somewhat kind of getting up the field, so he has to kind of tackle him from behind, like that kind of an angle. And he kind of just grabs onto the hip to grab onto something, pulls him down. You see Mark Andrews' notion. So that was the impetus for calling this meeting and outlawing the tackle. I want to hear your thoughts on it. What do you think?
You know, listen, it's hard to play defense in the NFL. You know, first of all, it's you know, they're big, they're fast. You know, I think my overall issue with it is that the offense does not have to stop and think. Right? They can play, you know, 100%, 1,000% versus defensive players. You got to make sure you don't put their body weight on them. Now you got to make sure you don't do a hip tackle.
Don't ever lower your head.
Don't lower your head. You know, make sure you don't hit their head. You know, watch out for their knees, you know. And that's more of a player-player thing, right? Like, at the end of the day, if you ask any player, hit me in the head any day of the week, then my knees, right? You take out my knees, I'm done for my career. And so...
but that's what you're going to get now, I feel like, with this.
You know, well, it's, you know, it's tough, right? Because it's ambiguous, right? In the sense that if you tackle someone from the side, is it the hip or is it the...
If I go around your waist versus does my hand have to be on your hip pad?
And like, what is that strike zone, right? Because that's what's difficult with the targeting rules now, where you can, you know, there's defenseless player, there's targeting of the above the shoulders. Yeah. So there's so many, you know, the strike zone for a tackle, a hit, you know, has been limited, and now bringing down the player has further been limited. I do get that they want to take so much out of the game, but it is not flag football, right?
I agree.
And I think, you know, I mean, the only answer is, you know, maybe quicker whistles, right, to protect the offensive player. And maybe every now and again, you're going to get a situation where, you know, that person may have broken a tackle. But, you know, if it's, you know, if it's about protecting the player and you're going to change these rules, maybe start off by having a quicker whistle, right, to be able to, cut a play.
Sure,
and
if
move
it's
on
a
to the next
hairy-looking
one.
tackle, you don't like it, then maybe try to just, like you just said, blow the whistle. You're already doing it whenever quarterbacks get touched and it's multiple guys and they don't go down right away. So do it for other players then too. That's ultimately what you're trying to get at.
Right, and think of it this way, right? Also, too, players fighting for extra yards a lot of times offensively get hurt, right? Because that defensive player is holding them up.
Sure.
Right? That defensive player is
guys
holding
are
them
coming
up.
in,
Other
yeah.
guys are coming in, and they could take their head off, right?
Sure.
And so the quick whistle, is my, thought and solution to it. But the fact that they banned it is going to make it much harder.
Sure.
Now, you can argue that they want more offensive touchdowns. You can argue that they don't want
It's what a lot of the
much
sports
defense,
are going towards
right?
now, yeah.
But,
Scoring.
Again, if they take away the aggression and the hitting and tackling out of football, and now it becomes flag football, that might cost them more.
It's a slippery slope.
Right? And
It's-
so, look, the pressure's on the defensive player, and I think in this particular case, in so many cases, there has to be some pressure on the offensive player.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have the horse collar
That's
tackle,
gone.
right? There's also that ties in with dreads and hair.
Yep.
And now with hips. All right. So think about it. You got to make sure you don't grab them too much by the, in the upper shoulder. Now you got to make sure you don't grab them around the waist.
Sure.
Right. And think about it. If you tackle them forward, they could drag you. Right. And now you're losing your job.
Yeah.
Right. Because you didn't make an effective tackle.
And when you make a player more hesitant, like you make that, that's where injuries are usually more likely to occur, when people are hesitant and not quite sure what to do. And shout out to actually a podcast that I follow quite often, 3 and Outs, John Middlecoff. He was a former NFL scout. He works on, in conjunction with Colin Cowherd with his new network, The Volume. It's fantastic. But he said something that I was listening to him this morning that rang so true. He said, I was intimidated playing football because football is an intimidating sport. It's a violent game. It no matter what you do, how many rule changes you make, it's an inherently violent game.
Agreed.
You can make all these different rule changes. The injuries are still going up too. That's the crazy thing. They're trying to make the game safer. These guys are bigger, faster, stronger because each time, first of all, it's the most popular game in the country right now. You've got people all over the country that regardless are always going to go and try to play football. And they predicate themselves on how tough and how violent can I be? How physically tough can I be?
So this is also a big part of it too, right? By changing all of these rules, you're actually making defensive players, how do you say this, less effective tacklers.
1,000%.
Right?
How do you practice?
Now, how do you practice, right? And then in the game, how are you properly taking them down if you can't effectively hit them but this smaller strike zone?
Sure.
Right? And so now you have to think that player's worried about their family, they're worried about their job, they're worried about their money, they're worried about, injuring themselves.
Yes.
So now they're thinking about all these different things. And so a hesitant player is a dangerous player
Sure.
because they don't know what they're doing or what they should hit.
Sure.
Right? And so I think there's the aggression of the clash, and then there is the hesitancy that could be just as dangerous in many ways.
Yeah, no, listen, I totally agree with you. And at the end of the day, you can make all these changes. You got to err on the side of caution, though, because the NFL right now, they can do almost no wrong. The sport is so popular within the country. But I think if you keep legislating that physicality out of the game and you start creating a lesser that's some of the reason why people watch the game for the hits. If you're taking some of that out of the game, I do wonder if over time that NFL's like bulletproof shield, it does start, some of those bullets slowly start to make their way through the armor. The other rule change now is the new kickoff formation. So
Which they stole from the XFL.
They did steal from the XFL. Now I haven't seen the kickoff. The kickoff guy, he still lines up at the normal kicking spot.
I think they said they're going to move it back 5 yards,
Okay.
so to the 30 to ensure that there are more kickoffs.
But the
So
two lines are only about 10 yards apart to
Exactly.
eliminate like the full speed collisions within each other.
Exactly.
That one, I'll be honest with you, I'm fine with that. And I actually thought it was pretty cool watching the XFL because it did create, you just said it, more returns. There's more because a kick return is an exciting play to watch, especially if somebody gets to break
it's field
one long.
position, right?
Absolutely.
Separate from scoring a
Great
touchdown,
point.
it's field position. And if you're
Great
trying
point.
to get back in the game, a short amount of time,
Yes.
right? You pop a big run, take it from the 25 to the 45. All of a sudden, you now need another 20 yards and you're in field goal range.
Sure.
That's a massive advantage, especially when time is against you.
Yeah, so I like the kickoff formation, the hip drop tackle. I guess only time will tell. I'm curious to see how it gets policed once the season starts.
Yeah. And
Because
I'm
I just
also-
can't see guys just making that adjustment that quickly.
Yeah, so I think a part of it is that defensive players might just have to, give up on some plays, right? Because think about,
or use that out of bounds line and just find ways to, sandwich a guy and be able to push him out of bounds somewhat, especially if you're coming from like, that angle where a player's a little bit upfield, so you have to go like this. He might still end up being ahead of you. So it's like you're just going to try to grab the nearest thing that you can to get him down.
But I think a part of it, when you're chasing a guy, right, you're not thinking, right? You're literally running him
get
down.
To him and bring him down.
Exactly, right? And so, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting.
It will be. So only time will tell. The final one, we had just finished up an off-season report about the Kansas City Chiefs. And then the news breaks, I believe, either end of the week or over the weekend. L'Jarius Sneed does get traded. He gets traded to the Tennessee Titans. They swap 7th-round picks, and they get a 3rd rounder for next year. I was shocked. You and I text about it. Give me your thoughts.
Listen, I don't know where it went wrong, but I think it was a disastrous trade, right?
I was surprised,
for
too.
a 3rd-round pick next year.
You essentially just swap 7s.
Exactly. Yeah. So my thought process, if you were just going to swap, you would have swapped this year, right? And that swap should have at least been a 2nd.
You couldn't at least get a 3rd this year too? Like,
yeah, 2 3s or a 2nd and a 6, something like that. I would think. And first of all, here's the other thing why it's such a disastrous trade. At that price point, there should have been so many more teams that
could have just played out the season with them too. Right? They would have lost him for nothing.
Financially
they got compensatory, but that's about it.
Yeah, I think financially they couldn't afford him. But more so, what I'm saying is, how come
they would have had no room around the margins too, like depth, little pieces like that.
Right? So, how come the Philadelphia Eagles were not interested in him? How come
spent all their money on Saquon?
A team like the Seattle Seahawks that are rebuilding and to make a push for that division was not interested. The Rams. How come? Now, I figure they wouldn't want to trade them in the AFC, so that eliminates a lot of teams.
Sure.
Right? But, the Bears.
But what team doesn't need a good defensive back?
Right? Exactly, right? They're limited. They're few and far between. Tampa Bay. There's so many teams that could have used him for only a 3rd rounder. Now, the money was high. It was a little over, $21 million a year. I think
it was just around 22.
But look, listen, Kansas City know what they're doing. They're able to develop and draft cornerbacks, so that's why they could get rid of them.
Yes.
The disappointment in the trade is the compensation. I expected a 2nd-round pick.
At minimum.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Right, a 2nd-round
27-year-old shutdown corner, 2 years in a row. This last year, he was graded as one of the best corners in the league.
And furthermore, the Lions, I don't understand why they weren't interested at that price point for a 3rd-round pick.
As opposed to signing 3 higher level, like money free agents.
Exactly. So that's where things start to fall apart, where it's a little bit more confusing, where Kansas, I get it, Kansas City want to dump him and get some compensation.
Sure.
And I don't understand why that compensation didn't turn into from a 3rd to a 2nd, with play time and other factors.
Sure.
So I think there could have been some contingencies in there, but what do you think about the trade?
So I think KC's options got somewhat limited once a lot of the other teams made their moves in free agency. I guess my biggest... The only thing that I can come up to, and again, this is just from listening to a few different people, was KC ultimately realized their bargaining power was somewhat limited. Maybe they didn't want to go into the season having kind of a hairy, weird situation. Hey, what's going on with my contract long term? And Sneed had a little bit of a say in this too as well, because he's only going to want to get traded to a team that's basically signing up to extend him long term.
Yeah.
Maybe the Titans were one of the only teams that was going to do that. I guess they were. That's why they ended up trading him there. And then it was like, okay, well, now you're KC sitting there between a rock and a hard place. You kind of don't want to enter this situation in this, just like how you talked about the Bengals going with Higgins this year. Like, that could end up being a weird situation. Maybe KC didn't want to do that, combined with them trusting their ability to draft as well. They have McDuffie on the other side who they drafted, they think can replace him. And maybe they also trust that while losing him is bad, they kept Jones, which is the more important of their 2 pieces. They've upgraded someone on offense with their pass-catching weapons, so maybe that's the balance out. They gained more on offense, I think, through their offseason so far than they lost on defense with Sneed, if that makes any sense.
I think you bring up a great point. Even if they traded him and got a receiver back, right? A younger receiver, you know, I think that would have made a lot of sense. Or any player, right,
Sure.
that could have contributed. That's just a really interesting thing that, you know, left me a little baffled. But yeah, the money played a big role.
Yeah, maybe they can go and still draft. They trust their scouting and drafting department. They can go draft a solid corner
And
to
this is a
replace.
rich draft. So any draft that they would have wanted multiple draft picks, it should have been this one.
And listen, you've won back-to-back Super Bowls, so who am I to sit there and question you at the end of the day? I think you know what you're doing. But that is all the time we have for segment number 1. But don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to Run It Back on segment number 2. What is up, everybody? I am your host, Shane Mallory, joined, of course, by my co-host, Mr. DaCosta. And this is segment number 2, the final segment for this week's portion of Run It Back. Beautiful people, before we leave the show today, I just have to say, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's really easy. Click that bell icon. That gets you the subscription. Like any of those comments or posts you see, and comment whether you want to give us, positive feedback.
You're
or the
missing your
smoke.
Cowboy fans, right? Like,
I am missing them a
they
little
haven't
bit.
have been
I
in your
am missing
comments
them a little
lately. Like, have they been a little slow? In
Hasn't
free
been much.
agency?
Hasn't been much news for them in free agency now either. So I mean, it's
so
been
you're
a little bit
heartbroken.
tough.
Them
I'm
boys,
fine. I'm fine. I'm ready for them any day.
them
of the
boys
week,
ain't
man.
do nothing for you, right?
They're not. It's funny. I was actually talking about it with a student today who's a big time Cowboys fan, and I was actually being like genuinely nice. Like, here's what I think the Cowboys should kind of do. Like,
The jerk was being genuinely
the
nice.
jerk was being genuinely nice.
Whoa.
Yeah, for once. Yeah. Maybe we're turning over a new leaf here.
Lies.
Now, before I go into NCAA March Madness, because we went into this, quick little shout out, NCAA March Madness happened this weekend. I'm talking about college wrestling. The NCAA championships were actually over this weekend.
Okay.
Shout out to our hometown Rutgers. They had 2 All-Americans. Now, unfortunately, I think I've told you guys this before. I wore a shirt on one of our first episodes commemorating a kid that I work with. Yes, John Paz, All-American. Round away from being an All-American. He lost in the last round right before.
What happened?
Tough match. He had the guy, man. It was an overtime match. I thought he had him in a takedown. They didn't call it. People could have argued one way or the other. But, I think, he and I talked a lot. We had actually met up the week prior to him wrestling. We went out, had a little dinner, just caught up. I wanted to just make sure his head was in a good place.
Yeah.
So shout out to my guy as well. He's still got 2 years left of eligibility to get back on, on the podium.
All-American
and
track,
climb all the way back up. So, he and I are going to try to get together and work over those next 2 years to see how we can, get back to where, we both know that he can be. But shout out to him and the Rutgers wrestling team. 2 All-Americans is still very nice. It was a fantastic tournament, man. I was glued to the TV all weekend.
Nice.
So, but now we get into March Madness. So last week you picked 4 teams. I picked 4 teams to follow.
And how did you pick your 4 teams? You freaking picked animals?
I used
mascots,
animals
right?
for one.
Let the record...
animals for one. Just one.
Jesus.
I knew all the other teams' names.
Sure you
but
did.
We're actually both doing really well, all right? You still have 3 of your teams remaining. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You had Alabama.
Yep.
You had Kentucky.
Yep.
You had UConn. And who was the 4th?
Gonzaga.
Okay. So the only one that Kentucky went out almost the next night in the round of 64. That was tough. I couldn't help but laugh when I saw it the next day. But I mean, the tournament's crazy.
I pick with my heart, man.
They don't call it March Madness for nothing, man. But I did have a feeling with all those blue bloods, someone was going to come and disappoint you, unfortunately. Me on the other side.
I got UConn.
You do have UConn.
I got
you
UConn.
And they are the favorite right now still. They were favorite coming in. I have all 4 of my teams still in it in the Sweet 16. So we have Iowa State. That was one of my picks. They're still in it, going up against Illinois, the Fighting Illini. We've got Creighton. I still don't know their name, their mascot's name, but they're going up against...
Was that really your pick, or, did someone give you that
maybe
one?
Maybe a student helped me out a little bit with that one. But I mean, hey, listen, we all get a little bit of help in life, right? They're going up against the Tennessee Volunteers. That's a 2-3. So actually, Iowa State, Illinois is 2-3. Creighton, Tennessee is 2-3. So getting down to the wire here, you're starting to get some of those tougher matchups. Then we got my new favorite team now that I'm loving outside of UNC, of course. NC State, the 11 seed, the Wolfpack, baby. Don't mess with the Wolfpack.
You realize you're not even loyal. You can't even pick one state in the state of North Carolina. You got
that song. These ain't loyal. I didn't say the word because I know what word it was.
Don't sing. Don't sing.
Our producer's face just lit up when I said that. NC State, the 11 seed, taking on a 2 seed in Marquette. And then finally, little showdown between you and I, UNC versus Bama. All right. This is a big eliminator. We'll either be tied going into the Elite Eight now as the next round, right? After this, or I'll have 4 going into the Elite Eight and you'll only have 2. So it's tough here. I did want to talk about.
I can't deal with your mouths. I'm rooting for Alabama.
Yeah, I know, of course. But I got to talk about this NC State team for a second because I haven't watched all the games. Oh, we do kind of though, because I'm gonna actually talk about a player, not a wolf. I'm not gonna howl or anything. Oh, sorry. Had to get that in. NC State, my dude DJ Burns, bro is 6'9", 275.
That guy
bodying people in the post, man.
The guy playing football on the basketball court.
Yes, and I love it. Anytime you got a guy like that who's that big at the college level, you're gonna have a chance because who are the other teams can guard a dude like that? Haven't seen a dude that big also rock the paint since, going a throwback here. You remember our boy, rest in peace, Robert Tractor Trailer from the Michigan Wolverines. Young Guns, if you don't know who he is, go back and look up some of his highlights. You'll then see exactly what I was talking about. He was about 6'8", 300 pounds plus, but just a man amongst boys in that post.
Is that body shaming? You just picked another big man and compared them?
No, big is beautiful, baby. Man, come on. We in 2024. Big is beautiful. And I'm loving what DJ Burns in this Wolfpack is. Clearly, we see who the alpha male of the Wolfpack is. It's one DJ Burns. I just saw him bodying up dudes in the paint. And I haven't seen anybody that can really stop this guy right now. My kids are all talking about it. And my kids said, when I picked my 4 teams, they said, Mr. Mallory, that NC State pick is nice, man. Watch out for this kid Burns.
Nobody said that to you.
Maybe one kid. A kid did actually say it to me today in our mass before we left for spring break. But give me your talks or a breakdown on this March Madness. What are you thinking here?
Look, listen, it's been a lot of chalk, right? A lot of heavy favorites have won,
yes,
right? But to me, UConn, separate from being my pick, they're about their business. Yeah. They're on a mission.
They look very good.
I picked them because I thought they had the experience that's coming to fruition now. Yeah. And listen, guess what, man? They're playing defense.
Yes.
Right? There's no question about their identity like what the LA Clippers are going through right now. The UConn is focused on winning back-to-back national championships. Sure. And right now, I don't see anybody that could stand in front of them. So you might have a couple more people on me, but I clearly have the best team in the game.
We'll see. Like I said at the beginning of this thing, you never bet against the Tar Heels when they're a 1 seed. I still think I got the Tar Heels going.
When was the last time they won a national championship?
Been a while.
Exactly.
I'll be honest with you. I don't know the exact year. They had to have won one since Tyler Hansbrough because that's when I was in college. They had to have won at least one in that time. But I don't know. I mean, listen, the landscape of college hoops also has changed a lot. And I will say this about the tournament at large. I used to watch it when I was younger. I think one of the big things that has hurt its overall popularity, the one and done culture makes it so much harder for you to get kind of too attached, especially to some of your favorite players, because the best ones are going to be leaving after 1 year. So it's much harder to get attached to that
ultimately,
regard.
I think what you're talking about leads to experience and leads to culture.
Yes.
Right? At the end of the day, those seniors have a certain level of toughness.
Yep.
Those seniors pave the way for those younger freshmen, and when you sprinkle in some one and done guys, now you can elevate to the next level to really win a national championship. Yes. So I think Kentucky and Calipari has to really change his model, right, and find guys that.
Well, are you trying to put guys in the NBA, or are you trying to win a national championship? I think that's somewhat of the balance you have to kind of weigh.
Well,
now.
Remember, you have to think about this, right? So the benefit of me picking UConn, like I said, is their experience. When you have a one and done player, they just were in high school.
Their players tend to stay.
Now this is their first. March Madness tournament. Think about it. Watching it is madness. Yeah. Imagine being in the game.
The women are the favorite too on the other side as well, are they not? The UConn women's?
No, actually, I think it's South Carolina.
Okay.
That's favorite now. Obviously, you got Iowa. That
Caitlin
is
Clark.
Caitlin Clark.
She's bad.
She's a country favorite.
Man. Yeah.
But you got LSU.
Yes.
Right.
And Angela Reese, is that her name?
That's one Angel Reese. Yep, exactly.
I'm sorry. Yep.
And then UConn is is still.
They
in the
used to be awesome. Gino Auriemma. I remember they had that crazy streak for however long they went 70-something games without losing.
Yeah, they're transitioning, but they're still up there. They're still respectable.
Okay. So I mean, listen, we've got March Madness now. We got this is the Sweet 16 now happening. So I mean, This is where the games just get that much more intense, ratcheted up, the defense, the pressure, the intensity. So I'll definitely sit down and try to watch at least, the tail part, especially some of my teams, because if all
yeah, watch that Bama game because
I can't wait because that's
when Bama wins, I got a lot to say.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think you're going to be really disappointed because I mean it's Bama versus UNC. This ain't the football. This ain't the football field. This is the hardwood, man. It's basketball. I got Tar Heels all the way in that matchup, but you'll definitely be talking it up if Bama does pull off that upset.
Damn right.
Now go a little bit to NBA right here.
Okay.
All right. We go a little contender versus pretender, starting the Eastern Conference, which goes on 3 teams. Maybe with a little time, sneak in somebody who thinks should be on the list that isn't on the list. But let's just start with the clear-cut one. Boston Celtics, contender or pretender?
Listen, obviously they're contender. There's just too much talent.
Best record in the NBA.
But my problem with Boston, right? They just had a terrible loss to Atlanta.
Yes, they were up 30 points.
Up 30 points. No Trae Young. Boston relies too much on the 3-point shot.
Totally agree.
And Miami's been able to knock them out a couple of times now in the Eastern Conference.
They very well could play in the first round with the way the seeds are.
Round.
Yeah.
They play tough defense, right? And they take away your weakness, right? One of the things.
And they don't try in the regular season. They care about the postseason.
So it's funny. One of the things Michael and Kobe always said, right? Take away their right hand and make them play left-handed, right? And so all of a sudden with Boston, if you eliminate the 3-point shot from their game, you see that they play a lot of ISO, a lot of one-on-one, right? And so all of a sudden,
take a lot of contested jump shots.
Exactly. So can they run a hot streak to an NBA championship? It's possible, but is that the most likely outcome? So I think that's a concern. And the better defensive team, Miami being one of them, Bucks are tremendously improved on defense.
Playing a lot better.
Watch out for them New York Knicks. They're one of the few teams that really play defense when it comes to Tom Thibodeau. And
the Knicks are finally starting to get healthy. Reports are that Mitchell Robinson is going to be back, could be back at the end of this week, which I think is huge. Because if he comes back, now all of a sudden you have Mitchell Robinson, you have Hartenstein, you have Precious Achiuwa. If Julius Randle comes back, I mean, that's a front line. They come the postseason. This is something
Don't forget about OG.
Oh, OG too as well. But that's something that's been proven over the last 10 to 20 years. If you want to make a deep run in the playoffs, having a formidable front line, one that can attack the boards both offensively and defensively and make it a struggle for the other team, just turn it into a slog, a rock fight per se. I stole that from my man Jason Timpf too.
But here's the thing, right? You mix that with a Jalen Brunson, a point guard that doesn't turn over the ball a lot, a point guard that plays defense, a point guard that can hit 3 and score.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so much dangerous as a combination.
Sure. And
I
a Josh
really
Hart
scary.
where he just goes, is Mr. Do Everything.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to do whatever you need. The Knicks have that identity where it's like they have their star and they have all their players that fit their roles. They have the dirty work guy and a Josh Hart, and then they have a formidable front line. I'm not saying that they beat Boston or Milwaukee, but I can easily see them making it a very competitive series with either one of those teams.
Remember, we're talking about like Boston, whether they could truly be a contender, and the answer is yes.
Yes.
But the things that will eliminate them, I think the Heat and the Knicks have as a strong component.
I agree with you. So listen, I have the Celtics as a contender too, but I'm also like, it's weird with them. Like, I get it. You have a freakishly talented top 5. You might have the most talented pure starting 5 in the league. And then even their 6th man, I mean, it's just talent beyond words. But I'm still just waiting. Like, I've seen you make the finals. I've seen you be good. One of the better, if not best teams in the Eastern Conference. I'm waiting for, like, that next step where you come into the playoffs and dominate. It's not like a slog for you to get through series. You just come in and roll through teams.
But here's the other thing, right? And watch out for it. If they don't win the championship this year, I could see them breaking up
the team.
Jalen and Tatum. Because
how much longer
what?
are you going to do this?
Exactly. Yeah. Right? Separately from that, they haven't produced the outcome you're looking for, even though you've won a lot of games.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm thinking chemistry could be an issue.
And
if
I
they
do
don't
think it
win
ultimately
all this
relies
year.
on Jason Tatum too, because as great as Jaylen Brown is, because I think he's awesome, and he's kind of like the alpha male leader personality wise. Tatum is the best player on the team, and he needs to go and show that type of decision-making and leadership, and he needs to play the type of offensive game that's going to get them over the hump.
But you see, I think Jaylen Brown makes better decision-making.
I agree.
Right?
I do agree.
Think, Tatum is the better talent, but from a defensive and overall perspective and an offensive perspective, Jaylen Brown is very dangerous, and I think he's underrated, and I think he's underutilized in Boston.
Yeah. So listen, now we have the Bucks. So we both think the Celtics are obviously a contender. The Bucks, Not only am I going to go contender right now, I think they are rounding into form right at the right time. And this is something that a guy who I follow all the time, if you're looking to learn more just about the game of basketball, I've shouted him out before, but he's another member of The Volume. His name is Jason Timpf. He runs a podcast called Hoops Tonight. You want to talk about a guy who can just break down the game for somebody who doesn't understand a lot about basketball? He's awesome. I wouldn't mind actually taking some of their clips too and like putting them up so that we can react to those too as well. They're great guys. But anyway, he talked about this at the beginning of the year. He said he felt Boston would easily be the number 1 seed in the East. They only had to really integrate one more key piece, right? The Bucks were integrating 2 high-level stars together to go and play. So it was going to take a lot of time. They're rounding into form. Middleton just came back and actually had a triple-double the other night. So I think that combined with maybe Doc Rivers figuring this out, running a little bit more of the pick and roll. I don't think Milwaukee is quite the defensive team that they were last year. That's the trade-off that they made. But I think the ceiling they could get to offensively, I like my pick from the beginning of the season with the Bucks going to the NBA Finals. They are a contender for me.
Listen, obviously they're contenders, right? But I think what makes it interesting, I don't think Doc has figured it out yet, right?
Okay.
I think Doc has patched it together and has, made a solid meal. I don't think he's, made the best dish possible, but I think
Shannon Sharp,
right? But no, seriously, I think they are seriously dangerous, right? But there's so much improvement. They're still lacking some depth overall. So I think when it comes to them, they'll go far. I think matchup is going to play a big role. But I do think their pick and roll between the two of them could be really, really dangerous. And once they turn it on, right, which they've ramped it up recently, you can see that they can, hold teams from scoring a bunch of points, but then they can put up a bunch of points
100%.
and watch Dame to step up. I think as
Dame time.
Exactly. As we enter this playoffs, Giannis is going to get his points, but come fourth quarter, I think Dame's going to take over.
I'm with you. And I think the Knicks, we kind of just said this already. So I'll say this about the Knicks. I think they are at least good enough to make the Eastern Conference Finals. I really do believe that. I think the Knicks at full strength, and I think a big part of this hinges on what is OG's health level, because I think OG is so important to what they're trying to do, especially defensively. If you want to go and play a team like Boston, you want to go and play a team like Milwaukee and be able to compete, if not possibly beat them, OG has to be healthy because he's going to be set up probably with the most challenging defensive assignments in those series. He's probably going to have to guard a Tatum or a Brown on multiple occasions. And in Milwaukee, he's going to go and guard that big dude, Giannis, if he has. Like, that's the only guy I think that could actually match up. Without a healthy OG, I really don't think the Knicks are a true contender. But if they are 100% healthy, at least Eastern Conference Finals, and again, who knows? When you make a series competitive and it's a slog and a slowdown, I like the Knicks in any series where it's just an ugly physical type brawl. I think they have the bodies to match up with those teams. I really do.
Yeah, I think where it's going to fall based on the seeding and the style that they play, the Knicks are serious contenders, right? Just based on that. But that decision is completely predicated on how it does, right? And they've already played that way.
That's how they play.
Exactly.
Yeah,
they already have a half-court set. That's one of the things that the Boston
one of the best
is
defensive
lacking.
teams in the league.
But Milwaukee has that, right? So I think Knicks match up well with Boston. I think they're going to have some challenges with Milwaukee. I still think they could win. But other than those two with no Embiid, I think it's a clear path. Those are the top 3 teams in the East, not based on standings, right? But based on, talent, experience, styles.
Yes, and if they're all healthy.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm with you. So I don't even think we need to spend much time on this one, but the Nuggets. I mean, not only to me are they contender, favorite.
Yeah, they've literally flipped the switch, and I've been highly impressed. And to me, I could see them repeating.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the only team that beats them on the in either conference, I really do think the only team that can beat them is the Bucks, just from a matchup standpoint. But we'll go right to the Thunder. I'll say this, and I'm not trying to disrespect them. They're a fun team. They're a talented team, and I think their future is very bright. But as a title contender, they're a pretender. And the reason that I call them a pretender is because outside of Chet Holmgren, they have no size. They cannot close out possessions because Chet is the guy that has to come out and challenge shots, and they have nobody to close that. They don't have a true power forward or somebody that just closes out. And in playoff scenarios, when it gets ugly and people crash the boards, you need somebody to close out defensive possessions and go grab those defensive boards. They don't have that. So while they're fast and they're young, and I think their future is very bright, not a true contender for me.
Hey, you stole my thunder. No pun intended. I 100% agree with with you.
You stole my thunder.
Listen, no, they're still too young, right? And again, I think everybody is gunning to match
Love
up with
SGA,
them.
by the way.
Love
Love them.
superstar.
And I think Williams is going to be a stud, too, in a couple of years.
I think everyone is gunning to match up against them because I know they could take them down based on size, based on I know
They
that's
know
who,
what the playoffs
that is who,
are like.
right? That I definitely think that's who the Lakers want because I don't think they
100%.
match up well with the Lakers. So,
100%.
Yeah, they're pretenders in my book.
Now, T-Wolves.
Yeah, what do you think about this one?
This one's tough, right? Because when they were 100% healthy, Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, who now is just recently hurt, and Anthony Edwards, who is just, dude's going to be a stud in this league. Like, he actually, in some ways, like when I watch his body movements, the way he dunks, his jump shots, reminds me a little bit of MJ. MJ even said so himself.
Whoa.
I'm not talking about how good he is overall.
People say
just
this.
Style of play.
I got
Just style of play.
I'll challenge you
moves.
there. I'll challenge you there, and I say I think he is a more skilled Vince Carter,
Okay.
right, than an MJ.
Okay.
Right? You know, can he go to another level? Yes. But I don't see him in terms of style.
Sure.
I see a better scoring, defending Vince Carter.
He is a good defender, too. But the T-Wolves, I feel bad calling them a pretender, but I guess it's more so like it's similar with the Thunder. While I do think they have the size and all the prerequisite needs to be a contender, a year or two away. Like, I still think they're young. I don't know if Anthony Edwards can necessarily be that guy. Now, I could definitely see them winning their first playoff series at the first time, and I don't know how long in Minnesota, but I don't see them making it to the Western Conference Finals.
I disagree, right? I think there's some magic going on in Minnesota, and I think...
And you were more doubtful about them when we talked about them in the midseason.
No, I was, definitely. But you know what? With Anthony Towns going down, I've been impressed with Ant-Man and how he stepped up and how they've been able to win.
He's a monster,
right?
dude.
Mike Conley, right? Gobert, right? There's
Jaden
some
McDaniels, one of the best perimeter defenders in the game right now.
Right?
Yep.
So I've liked how they've competed without Karl Anthony Towns.
I agree.
So I'm looking at him as being an addition, right? An added threat and weapon. And so with that being the case, if they continue to lean on Anthony Edwards and you sprinkle in some Karl Anthony Towns, I think they can make a strong push for the Western Conference Finals.
Right. Okay, so those are our contenders and pretenders this week. I'm impressed that you like them as a contender.
I do. They've turned me into a believer.
Nice.
I think the Thunder are 2 years away, but I think the Minnesota's time is now.
Okay, I like it. So listen, now we got a little bit of free agency talk. Okay, we're highlighting a new team. Last week we did the Chiefs.
Yep.
This week we close it out with the San Francisco 49ers, who obviously lost to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Looking at some of their offseason things that have happened so far. So Arik Armstead and Chase Young have left. Dre Greenlaw is obviously hurt. He probably won't be healthy to start the season. So a little bit of a void at the linebacker position. They signed Leonard Floyd, and then there are some Ayuk issues. So I would say if we're looking at in terms of need, they did get Hargrave last year. That's his name, right? The D-tackle. So it's like they have some depth there. Maybe they could use a little bit more help on the edge just to complement somebody like Bosa. Linebacker might be a little. But if I were looking at the biggest weakness for them last year, you could see when Trent Williams got hurt, their offensive line didn't nearly look the same. That right side, too, especially, because it looked questionable even with, but you could cover up a lot more because you could scheme to get more help to that side when Trent Williams was playing. So I would say offensive line first, and then also you've got to figure out this whole Ayuk situation too as well. But if you're the 49ers, you're in the front office, the scouting department, you're the GM, where do you think they have to go right now?
Listen, like I said this earlier in the pod, right? One of them had to go. Right. And I said I would trade Deebo Samuel, right, and try to get that, first, second round
traditional
pick, right?
True receiver.
100%. And he's been healthier than Deebo Samuel.
Because of Deebo's play style.
Right. So younger, healthier. And I still think he has a better connection with the quarterback Purdy.
Yeah, sure.
And so that's why I would keep him. But listen, it's
stay with Purdy for the record, right?
Yeah,
no
100%.
Quarterback.
Stay with Purdy. But ultimately, Ayuk feels disrespected. He's put up a lot of production.
He's a good player.
He's been a dangerous weapon, and he hasn't gotten the bag yet. So it's time to pay up. But I think they can flip him. Now, here's what's interesting. If Sneed only went for a third rounder, Ayuk that you're going to have to pay, what are you going to get for him? Before I would say definitely a second, maybe a late first round pick.
Yeah.
Now I'm wondering if you even, if you get a second, right? Do you get 2 3s for him? Because you're going to have to pay him.
Yeah.
And so do I think he's worth more than that in terms of draft compensation? 100%. But, the marketplace is real interesting right now. I think teams are resetting. I think teams are focused on the draft. This is a
I can tell you right now, a team's not giving up a first rounder for Brandon Ayuk.
No,
that's definitely not
especially not
happening.
in this
I don't even
draft.
know if a second rounder is feasible. I would think you're
that's
going
the
somewhere
challenge,
3-4.
right? And that's the challenge. So now with that being the case,
but doesn't that kind of, so to your point, and I get it, he's trying to make his money, get his bag, and dude, by all means. But if you're the 49ers and the best you could get is a third or a fourth rounder, is that somebody that you overpay?
No.
You know what I mean?
No.
Like, it's hard. Like, I get it, Ayuk, you want your money, but at the same time, and I think he's a very good receiver. But if we were ranking him, honestly, where do you think he's somewhere in that, like, 12 to 15 range in terms of like receivers in the league?
Right, I was thinking 12.
So, okay, I'm trying to be like nice or fair.
Right, but think about it, right? Why wouldn't the New England Patriots want him, right? Obviously, in terms of toughness, attitude, and grit, he fits perfect on the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Sure.
Right? If you are the Baltimore Ravens, right, why wouldn't you want to snag him? If you're the Baltimore Ravens, you should want to give up a first-round pick for him, right, because that's a super late first-round pick, and especially if you can negotiate a friendly contract with him.
Sure.
So I think there are definitely quality teams, that would want to look at him. If you're the Buffalo Bills, would you want to, pair him, with the Josh Allen, flip a Stephon Diggs, get a little bit younger in that position, and that might be a nice combination. So these are just, a couple teams that
They'd be drafting a 31, correct?
Who?
The 49ers?
The 49ers are 31.
Be the 31.
31. But
you think they could get a decent receiver there?
Oh, absolutely, right? You're going to have, the Texas receivers, right?
Because usually receivers start going in that 15 to 25 range.
Listen, you're going to have Xavier Worthy that ran a 4.2.
Yep.
You're going to have Mitchell out of Texas as well.
You're
Big
very
body,
high on him.
super high on him. If he ended up in San Francisco or the Chiefs,
Keontae Coleman might drop too, just because of his 40 time from FSU.
Right, yeah, he ran a 4.5, right?
4.64.
4.64,
so,
right?
I mean,
so,
he doesn't look that slow for the record when he plays, but the 40 time,
I mean, he's a big body, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big
Johnny
part
Wilson's another guy from FSU, another big dude. So
it's
a deep receiver draft.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, right, you could even get a great receiver in the second round.
Sure.
So I think they got to go offensive line. I think you said it best. But at the same time, if I am the 49ers, don't be shy to double down, right, on the defensive line and the defensive end position. And here's why. The number 8 out of Washington, his name is slipping my head. He should be
I know who you're
late
talking
round,
about. Yes.
Dangerous guy to pair him with Bosa because you're going to have to match up the money, right?
Yes.
You're giving Bosa the big money.
There's a kid from Oregon, too, who's supposed to be very high.
Yep,
but yeah.
exactly, right? If you pair them with a younger guy, now there's your pass rush for the future, and you don't have to pay him for 5 years.
That's a
good
good
with
point.
that scheme, if you remember, they don't like to blitz, right? They just fired their coach because he was a more aggressive blitzing coach.
Sure.
So with that being the case, you're going to want to, you might want to pair him another edge, right, to go with that depth in that defensive line.
Would you say this? Say they figure it out with Ayuk somehow or another. They figure out the contract at 31. Then would you definitely double down and go best defensive player / try and find me the best linebacker or defensive end
if
pass
Ayuk
rush
is
type
still,
player?
I'll say this: regardless of Ayuk being on the team,
Yes,
right, they got to go offensive or defensive line. Depth on the offensive line, depth on the defensive line, because that is the foundation of your team.
Sure. Yeah, so I like that. I think that if you can figure it out with Ayuk, that's great. Obviously, you keep a good weapon in-house. And then I'm with you. At 31, I'd say the nice thing about it is when you're drafting again, it's kind of like a BPA approach. So the best offensive or defensive lineman at that spot, drafting him at 31 is great. But then again, and then within those next 2 to 3 rounds, 2 and 3, you can really fortify. I would probably go defense just because it's harder to find good defensive linemen than it is offensive linemen. So I'd probably try and take the best defensive lineman / pass rush type player available. Keep that strength, like you said. And then 2 and 3, I might just be looking to really beef up the depth of my offensive line.
Yeah, and listen, right, I'm not against grabbing a wide receiver, right?
Sure.
I know it's probably, taboo, but if Debo's great, but he's getting older. He gets beat up.
Yep.
Kittle is awesome and underutilized.
Yes.
Right? So then who do you pair with him? Obviously, you have Jennings, but there's no other dangerous
And it's
threat.
a much more
You
run-based
put a
offense anyway.
Xavier Worthy on that team. Now you have, all whirly speed.
Yeah.
Right? Then that might be
like
what
your
they need to
Worthy
open
Mitchell.
it up.
I like your Worthy Mitchell ones just because I feel like those are guys that even though which one was the one who Worthy's the one who ran the crazy 40.
429, 424.
He might fly up a little bit, but again, someone like a Mitchell, there are going to be some quality receivers, I think, that are there for the 49ers if they can't get this thing worked out with Ayuk. And again, to your point, wherever you draft, that's an extremely controllable contract, especially the fact that you're drafting him at 31, not 15 or 10.
Watch out. I said this before. You're going to have to pay CMC some more money. I'm waiting for it. It's coming soon.
Yeah, we'll see with CMC, but they're definitely going to have to figure out Ayuk and Debo too as well. But listen, folks, that wraps up this week's episode of Run It Back, all right? I am Shane Mallory, joined by my co-host,
Ricky DeCosta.
and we will see you next week when we
Run it back.